Upcoming is a quick overview of my breeding program for my small flock of Dorper sheep that I own and manage on 30 acres. I'm going to discuss what I look for in a breeding ram, how I prepare my ewe flock for breeding, minerals that have significantly impacted flock fertility for me, and how to time breeding season for a successful pasture-based lambing. If you click on the first link in the description of this video, I actually have a breeding prep checklist. This is a printable that you can print out, pin to your refrigerator, and make sure that you are checking all of those boxes for your flock in the 2 months leading up to breeding season. For some context, I farm in Northeast Texas. Winters are mild and summers are extremely hot. I raise purebred Dorper sheep as a primary enterprise, and Dorper sheep are meat sheep. I also raise a small amount of stocker cattle for grass-fed beef. Rainfall in my area is about 45 inches annually, which makes for the perfect environment in which to practice regenerative pasture-based farming. My sheep farming system is very simple and low input. Feed input like grain and sheep feed mixes are reserved for emergencies only. I do not perform any fancy broad-based pasture planting or cover cropping. My sheep are raised on whatever grows on pasture by itself, and the variety and quality of forage improves year over year with good pasture management. I rotational graze my flock using electric fencing, moving my sheep to a new pasture paddock at a minimum of twice a week during the growing season. I consider this regenerative rotational grazing system to be the real crown jewel of my operation and work, because it was really these practices that took our sheep and our land from simply surviving to truly thriving. While I do have a simple two-sided structure to shelter my sheep from freezing rain and occasional snow, I aim to keep my sheep on pasture as close to 24/7, 365 as possible. My Dorper sheep are meat sheep, and my primary market is selling lambs as breeding stock to other small farms. What is not sold as breeding stock is grown out as pasture-raised meat. And when it comes to breeding, it starts with the ram. A ram is the easiest and fastest way to either upgrade or downgrade the quality of a sheep flock. When I consider a ram for my own flock, as much as I consider his physical characteristics, I also consider the system from which he came. Things like, was he fed more grain than grass? Is the climate he was raised in a similar one to mine? Is the flock he came from healthy? If I was to advise you in any way, it would be to take your time in shopping for a good ram and buy the best quality you can afford. I personally paid about $3,000 to acquire one of my best Dorper rams. I traveled about 1,000 miles to retrieve him, and it was well worth the time, money, and effort I put in. Which brings me to what I look for as far as body type in a good Dorper breeding ram. A good body type for a meat ram consists of a few important traits. A low line, which simply means a ram without too much leg length. A muscular, thick build overall, but especially in the hindquarters, as this is where you will be harvesting your leg of lamb from. A long, deep body is also desirable, as this is where many of the premium cuts of meat will also be taken from. For my farm personally, because I live in such a high rainfall area, I also want a ram with strong parasite resistance and good hooves. I'm often asked how many rams I keep for breeding, and a good ram can breed up to 40 ewes per cycle. But to play it safe and ensure that no ewe is missed, I prefer to keep 1 ram per 30 ewes. This practice helps me to maintain a tighter breeding window, and subsequently a tighter lambing time frame. However, if you can only afford 1 high-quality ram, sticking with 1 healthy ram per 40 ewes is perfectly sufficient. Another question I'm often asked is, do you replace your ram if you keep the ewe lambs he has fathered? Or can you breed a ram to his daughters? The answer is yes, you can breed a ram to his daughters, and I certainly do. This practice is known as line breeding, and if you are working with a high-quality ram, line breeding has many advantages. I will breed my ram to his daughters and his granddaughters, and at present I will sell all of those third-generation ewe lambs rather than keeping them as replacements. As you breed a ram to his daughters and his granddaughters, traits within that ram will be magnified in each successive generation of lambs. Now, this is true for good qualities as well as bad qualities, which reinforces the importance of choosing a high-quality ram if line breeding is going to be a part of your program. I recently spoke with a veteran show sheep breeder, and he cited that they would line breed their best ram to his female offspring for up to 8 generations. And while 8 generations is not something I am comfortable with at my farm, 2 to 3 generations has proven to be more than safe. I've been asked about genetic diversity on my farm. When I very first started in Dorper Sheep, it was my goal to get 4 genetic sets onto my farm and then close my flock. I started with very small quantities, sometimes just 2 ewes from an independent genetic set at a time. And this is really all you need when you're in sheep because they reproduce really quickly. And this was a good initial investment for me because as I have built out my flock, I have been able to maintain that diversity, culling out what works and what does not, and ultimately developing a really unique line that fits my region really well. While I do have registered sheep in my flock, I do not prioritize papers over performance. Most of my sheep do not have papers. Because I keep the same ram year over year, I'm often asked, where do you keep your ram when he is not breeding the ewes? When my ram is not breeding my ewes, he stays in a clean pen with fresh hay, minerals, and clean water. If you only have one ram, he does need some company in that pen. It's a good idea to keep a wether in the pen with him. I've also used goats so long as they both get along together, but either way, make sure he has some good company. As I transition into preparing ewes for breeding, one of my primary priorities is body condition. Ewes in good body condition have a higher chance of twinning, reduced lamb loss at delivery, better milk production post-lambing, and better disease resistance while they are nursing their lambs. Alternately, poor body condition leads to lower milk production and increased susceptibility to disease both before and after lambing. You want your ewes to score around a 3 or a 4 on a 1 to 5 scale prior to breeding. On that free PDF download I mentioned at the beginning of the video, I actually have some examples of good and bad body scores so that you can reference those as you evaluate your own flock. If your ewes are too thin, providing a feed supplement until they are scoring at least a 3 will save you a lot of trouble in the long run. And I say this based on experience. Over the past 4 years, I have made the mistake of breeding ewes that are much too thin. I've experienced pregnancy toxemia, where the ewe died before giving birth. I've experienced hypocalcemia. The other ewes that I bred in poor condition simply did not have enough milk supply to support their lambs after birth, at which point I would have to sideline and supplement these new moms with feed. Now, these lessons taught me that an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. I am very careful to now either cull the ewes that are too thin or take time to supplement and bring them up to speed before breeding season. I'm often asked, at what age should a ewe be bred? Now, this will vary from farm to farm, but I will simply share what I do at my farm. Technically, a ewe lamb will start cycling as early as 4 months old and can breed at that time if she is exposed to a ram. However, best practice is to wait until a ewe is either not a lamb anymore, which is 12 months old, or until the ewe lamb has reached half of her adult weight. At my farm, I opt for the latter. While you can separate your ewe lambs into separate groups before breeding, I keep it simple and I run everyone together in one group. About 80% of my ewe lambs will breed at around 6 months of age, and at this point in time, they are about half of their adult weight. Now, bear in mind, I do pay extra special attention to these ewe lambs come lambing time, and this is a requirement that typically accompanies breeding a sheep so young. So if you do not want to put in this extra oversight, I would recommend separating your ewe lambs and waiting until they are older to breed. And give this video a thumbs up to help it move forward. Hi, you just came into my video, but people said they've been missing you anyhow.
Hi, I've missed y'all.
How are the chickens?
Chickens are a-okay after 4 days of shepherdess watching them.
I took care of them for 4 days straight. I have to confess to you, I skipped one day.
That's okay, I do that sometimes.
Okay, kind of accidentally, but kind of like, I just didn't
on purpose.
It was Sunday.
I do, on Sunday I do skip, I just give them a little extra.
Okay, give them a little extra next day.
Got my stamp of approval.
Alright. A good mineral program is going to be critical for the fertility of your flock. Loose minerals should be available to your sheep year-round, and I personally recommend Redmond Sheep Mineral as an option for your flock. I do offer small 5-pound bags available for sale at my sheep supply shop on shepherdess.com with free shipping over $75 if you'd like to test out these minerals for your own flock and support my work there while you do. But one of the most important minerals to monitor when it comes to sheep reproduction is selenium. Due to high rainfall in my area, my soil and subsequently my forage tends to be selenium deficient. So I ensure my sheep mineral contains a minimum of 45 parts per million of selenium. A minimum of 30 parts per million is common for sheep mineral, and you will find some mixes with up to 70 or 90 ppm of selenium. You can check the ppm content on the back of the mineral package, where a total nutritional analysis is typically available for minerals. Selenium deficiency in sheep can lead to a failure to breed, stalled labor, retained placenta, weak lambs that struggle to stand and suckle at birth, and white muscle disease in weaned lambs. I experienced nearly all of these problems in my flock during my first lambing season. In fact, I'll include a link to my lambing vlogs in the description of this video in case you want to double back and watch any of those experiences. But long story short, I checked the selenium content on the loose mineral I was offering to my flock at that time and found that there was only 10 ppm of selenium in it, roughly 1/5 or 1/8 of what I should have been providing my flock at the time. Since increasing the selenium content of my loose mineral to a minimum of 45 parts per million, the aforementioned problems have dissipated. Now, flushing is a major topic when breeding sheep is discussed, and flushing ewes involves adding a high-energy supplement, typically grain, to your flock's diet beginning about 2 to 3 weeks before breeding. Now, the goal with flushing is to increase twinning rate. While flushing can effectively boost twinning rate, I do not grain flush my ewes. I simply ensure that my ewes are in good condition prior to breeding. Then I will put them out to graze the best pasture that I have available while they are with the ram. While I do not experience as high of a twinning rate or tripleting rate as operations that do grain flush, my goal is to manage pasture resources to improve lambing percentages. It is a long-term strategy, but it is a strategy that I am committed to. If you are not opposed to the idea of additional inputs, traditional grain flushing can certainly increase twinning rates within your operation. When is the best time to join your rams to your ewes? If you are running in a pasture-based system, the best month to join your ram with your ewes for breeding aligns with the concept of lambing with the pasture. Now, lambing with the pasture means that you schedule your breeding so that the lambs are born once the pasture grass is ready to graze. To lamb with the pasture, you need to identify the month in which your pasture begins to come alive, and then count backwards 5 months. The month you land on, after counting backward, will be the optimal time to join your ram to your ewes. For example of this, here in Northeast Texas, where pasture typically comes alive in early March, I join my rams with my ewes in early October. Now, I did make a slight adjustment to this concept of lambing with the pasture, which I will talk about in a minute, but overall the concept of lambing with the pasture is a very safe way to time your breeding. How long do you leave your ram with your ewes? Now, sheep breed in 17-day cycles. At my farm, I typically leave my ram with my ewes for 51 days, or 3 complete cycles. If you are only breeding your ewes once per year, you can technically leave your ram in the flock until lambing begins, and I did so for many seasons. However, I would consistently encounter 2 problems. When I left my ram in the flock for a full 5 months, I would end up with a few ewes that bred late, and subsequently, their lambs would be born late, typically during May or June. And these are really bad months for parasites here in Northeast Texas. Lambs born during May or June would struggle with a high parasite load for most of the summer, as would their moms. The second problem for me is connected to the fact that being on lamb watch is mentally taxing. If you leave your ram with your ewe for 5 months, you could technically be on lamb watch for 5 months, even if it is just for 1 or 2 stragglers there at the end. I found personally that confining my breeding window and being on lamb watch for 51 days is far more pleasant than being on lamb watch for 5 months. The ewes that do not breed in that 51-day window can be identified and evaluated for any mineral or physical deficiencies that may have prevented breeding. They may either be supplemented for success during the next season or simply culled from your flock. Now for some information on the adjustment that I made to the timing of my breeding this year. Now this year, instead of lambing with the pasture, I lambed 2 weeks ahead of the pasture. I joined my ram to my ewes in September instead of October, resulting in February and March lambs instead of the usual March to May lambs. To address the fact that the pasture was 2 weeks behind, I supplemented with alfalfa pellets and a protein lick tub in addition to quality hay. Now this adjustment worked really well for me and is a strategy I'm going to carry forward. But why did I do this, and what were the particular advantages that I encountered? Well, it goes back to 2023 when I experienced a really bad season with lamb losses due to parasites. And the lambs that were lost or struggled the most seemed to be those who were born after mid-April. However, I noted that the lambs born in February and early March had a much better natural resistance and struggled very little with parasite problems. As a matter of experiment, this year I moved my entire lambing season up 1 month, adding my ram to the flock on September 1st and removing them by October 21st, so that no lambs were born beyond March 21st. And this has been one of the best adjustments I have made for my farm personally. Number 1, my lambs gained good weight before the parasite bloom in June and July, giving them a strong natural resistance to worms and minimizing my need for dewormer. Number 2, my lambs were born before my spring grazing program started, allowing me to wrap up lambing and then focus on grazing. 2 things that in previous seasons, while not impossible, were somewhat difficult to juggle at the same time. Number 3, my ewes retained better body condition throughout lactation. This is because peak lactation, which is 30 days after lambing, aligned with peak pasture quality, which is about 2 weeks after that initial spring green-up. What's more is that by June, my ewes were on the downswing of their lactation period, which means that their immune system was on the upswing, improving their natural immunity to parasites and disease, and once again minimizing my need for dewormer. Please give this video a thumbs up and watch this next one where I give you a complete look at a pasture-based lambing season at my farm.